Well, good morning. Good to see each of you here today. Glad to have our teenage class with us today. Well, I say I'm glad. Happy you can be with us today, but I understand David's family's sick, so that's why you're in here. So sorry about David's family. Hope they get feeling better soon. I think it's a stomach bug is what I was told that they have. So we hope they get better. Hope that doesn't spread around to the rest of the congregation either. Stomach bug's no fun. John, would you settle down back there, please? Elder, oh, God, we won't go there. Glad to have you with us today. Let's see, any announcements that we want to share with each other before we get started? Any sickness we need to report on or any good things that are happening in the congregation we want to take notice of? Well, I just mentioned that the Carter family's got a stomach bug. Anybody else have any kind of problems?
Alan,
Yes, sir.
Jason Haynes called me yesterday. They've got some friends in Mississippi that wife passed away. She's been battling cancer for some time. But Harv Jones is the husband. Her name is Patricia. So Jason and Stephanie are headed down to Mississippi this morning for the funeral.
The husband's name is, what was his first name?
Harv.
Harv and Tricia
Harv and Patricia
Jones have a death in their family in Mississippi, friends of Jason Haynes. Okay, so let's keep Jason and his family in our prayers as they travel back and forth, and keep the other family in our prayers as they're seeking comfort at this time. Anyone else? Okay, well, let's go to God in prayer before we get started. Our most gracious divine Father in heaven, holy is your name. Thank you, Father, for the blessings you've given us, for this week we've had of work and play and time to reflect on life. And for this time we come together today, that we can reflect on your word, to study its teachings, to study what it's there, as we focus primarily this morning on the book of Esther, and try to understand how it applies to us today. We ask that you be with those names mentioned just now. Be with them, comfort them as the Jones family, as they struggle with the loss that they are experiencing. There are others in the community that have suffered loss, and we pray for them as well, that the Spirit will be with them, be a comforter, and they will find peace. We ask that you be with any sick of our number, or those who can't be with us today because of burdens, and bless them and help them in their struggles. Be with each of us. Please forgive us for our sins. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. Okay, so we have been in the book of Esther for the last few weeks, and I feel like I need to do a bit of a recap here. Since we have several in here that have not been in this class until now. Book of Esther is written after the book of Daniel, and just kind of give you a history of the way things transpired. When you read the book of Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther, they all are kind of clumped together back and forth as far as chronology is concerned. Daniel, when we read it, we see Daniel being taken into captivity by the Babylonians. And we have the story about the three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, how they basically stood up to the king, and when they were being told they needed to do certain things, they said, please let us do it our way, because we're Hebrews, we have a different way of life, and they did that, and we see how God blessed them in that respect. But then it came a point where they were asked, I think, to bow to the king, I believe it was. They refused to bow, and so they were thrown in the furnace, and as you know the story about how they survived the furnace, Later on, Daniel has the same type of problems with the lion's den. He was caught trying to pray to God, and he was thrown in the lion's den for that. So all this happens prior to Esther. I bring all this up because this happened under the Babylonian captivity when all the Jews, Hebrews, were exiled out of Jerusalem and brought under Babylonian rule and enslaved, I suppose. I'm not sure if it's slavery or just exile or what, how they stood. To be honest, I don't really understand their social status at that point. We know Daniel served under 3 different leaders, at least 3, Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, I think is his name, is the next one. We read about, if I've got my order correct, I have my order out of line, I'm not sure. And Belshazzar, I can't say his name. I always get confused and tongue-tied when I get up in front of public. Anyway, he's the one that had the writing on the wall, right? Okay, and so Daniel comes to him and he's asked to prophesy or answer his prayers for him, and he sees the hand, mysteriously writing on the wall, and then shortly after that, the handwriting takes place on the wall. Then we have Darius, I think it is, comes in and kills that king, and the Medes take over, basically. And the Medes are in conjunction with the Persians. Somehow they're working together. So I think Darius, if I got my names correct, is the king of the Medes, and then later Cyrus, who's a Persian, takes control. All this happens, and I think even up through Cyrus, Daniel is around. Okay? Cyrus, God puts it on his heart, and we read about this in the first chapter of Ezra. Matter of fact, I have this loaded. If you can pull up Ezra 1, we'll just go and start there, please. And in the first opening statement in the book of Ezra, it talks about Cyrus. Okay, find Ezra 1, please. You have to scroll down because they're not in the correct order for what I'm kind of ad-libbing here. There we go. This is Ezra. Ezra 1, Cyrus says, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, now it's called Persia, right? But it's the same location. Eventually, this area we're talking about is not just Babylonia, but it's going to stretch as far west as over beyond Jerusalem, over into the western banks, I think, of North Africa. It's going to travel as far north as we looked at the map a few weeks ago, as where Ukraine is now. And it doesn't go into Greece, but it touches Greece. And it comes over as far east as into India. So it's a large area that they eventually collect at this point in time that is under this king. So Cyrus, king of Persia, in the first year of this king, the word of God by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled. The king the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and also put it into writing. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth and has charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Okay, so here we see that at this point we don't know why, but for whatever reason, God decides to have the king of Persia to use his funds to rebuild the temple. Yes?
Of course, this is what happened here in Ezra chapter. It happened before 2 years before chapter 10 of Daniel.
Okay.
Okay, because that chapter 10 of Daniel says in the third year of Cyrus, that was the first year.
Okay.
Also, at this time, Ezekiel was still out there doing his prophecies and those things. This thing here, as far as the 70 years, it's my opinion that because God said that's how long it's going to be, that it fell right in place. And I just, I think whatever it took to put his mind to do that, God did it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. We don't know everything transpired, but it points out here that it was God's will, and that's really all that matters, isn't it? That God saw it needed to be done, and to take this person who was not a believer and have him to miraculously rebuild the temple for the Jews just seems very unusual for me to think he would do that, using his own funds to do that. So this is when we see it taking place. That's why I keep getting all this confused. And like you say, this even goes back into Daniel. As you said, it kind of crosses Daniel. So all these books, the end of Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, all kind of happen around the same time. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because we're going to be talking about Mordecai today and how he behaves. And we're going to contrast that with Ezra and Nehemiah in our discussion today. Okay, so that's where we're in verse 2. Go ahead to the next verse, if I have it listed up there. Whoever is among you, of all of his people, may his God be with him. In other words, he's talking to the Hebrews at this point. And let them go to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. There we go. And each survivor in whatever place he sojourns is assisted by the men of his place with silver and gold and goods and with beasts, besides free will offerings from the house of God that is in Jerusalem. Then rose up the heads of the fathers' houses of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and all the Levites, everyone whose spirit God had stirred up to rebuild the house of the Lord that is in Jerusalem. And all who were about them added with vessels of silver, with gold, with goods, with beasts, and with costly wares, besides all that was freely given. Cyrus the king also brought out vessels of the house of the Lord that Nebuchadnezzar, going back to the Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar had gathered away from Jerusalem and placed in the house of his gods. And Cyrus of Persia brought these things out of the charge of Mithredath, I guess it is, with the treasurer, who counted them out, and to Shebharza, the prince of Judah. Okay, so what I'm trying to point out here is, back when we read Daniel, we know that Nebuchadnezzar has taken all these goods from Judah, and he saved them for himself. He saved them in his kingdom, in his treasury. Here, after Nebuchadnezzar, after Belshazzar, after Darius, now Cyrus, it's all being returned to Judah. And this is all happening a little bit before Ezra. This is her, as I told you last week, Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, the same person, after he takes rule from his grandfather, then that's when Esther comes into play. So this is like 2 generations before Esther at that point in time we're talking about. And so what we just read about was recorded in Ezra. And let's see. I had a little time thing written down somewhere, trying to keep this straight in my mind because it's really confusing me, so I know I'm confusing you. So that was Ezra's account, right? Well, in reality, best we can tell, Esther precedes Ezra as far as their time on earth. Ezra was around 492 was the time she served as queen. Ezra arrives in Judah in 458. Remember, we count backwards in BC, right? So he comes to Judah after Esther, and then Nehemiah comes even later than that, 445 BC. So it's all in a same window of time. That's just the kind of chronological orders taking place. So it's kind of that's why I keep referring back and forth to these different books as I'm trying to point out a few of the things that are happening historically as it's falling in place. I hope I'm not confusing you with that too much, but I think it's worth mentioning and talking about. Okay, so that's where we are at this, well, actually, that's not where we are. I'm still trying to catch you up. Okay, so we have all these, we have the temple has been built, or is being built in Jerusalem, rebuilt, right? We have some of the Hebrews who are going back to Judah. They're given that choice. If you continue reading Ezra, you see all the numbers of people who are going back. You see all the things are collected. The accounts, it's kind of like an accounting system taking place in the first few chapters of Ezra. So all this is happening. Now, in the city of Susa, which is now the center of activity after Babylonia has fallen and we have the Persians in power, that's where Esther's located. They're all in the same general area, you might say, the Mideast, but Susa is the city where the temple is, or the kingdom is located. The king's palace is located during Esther's time. So that's where we are when the book of Esther starts up. So we have the Hebrew nation divided. We have some of them have headed back, some are still dispersed around different parts of this large kingdom that belongs to Persia. Okay. Chapter 1, we learned about the king, Ahasuerus, or Xerxes. He's thrown a big year-long party, and he likes to celebrate a lot. He's trying to show everyone his power and wealth because he's getting ready to go try to do what his father couldn't do. He's going to try to go attack Greece and take Greece in as part of their kingdom. So he's trying to build up himself and build up support for this adventure that he has going on. During this party time, he wants to exploit his wife. He wants the people to see how beautiful she was. This is Vashti we're talking about. She's having nothing to do with it. She won't let him do that, so she didn't take part in it. He gets mad, and he confers with others, and they decide it's time to get rid of Vashti. So he banishes Vashti from her position as queen. Okay, then chapter 2 takes place, and I think we said it's 3 years after chapter 2 comes into play. During that 3-year time period, we think is when he goes in, and I'm getting myself confused. I think that's when he goes in and attacks Greece, isn't it? Unsuccessfully. And when I keep referring to that movie 300, if you see the movie 300, this is the time period of 300 takes place. And that between chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Esther. He's unsuccessful. If you watch the movie, he's unsuccessful, okay? And he comes, we don't hear anything about that in the book of Esther. Chapter 2 picks up, and he is deciding how to pick his queen, and they have a beauty contest. Basically, they grabbed all the beautiful girls, or I don't know how many I say all, but they grabbed a lot of girls around the kingdom, and we told you how much of an area this encompasses, and brings them to the palace. And of all the girls that were selected, Esther was the one that he chooses to be his queen. That's what happens in chapter 2. Okay, and that's basically the biggest part about chapter 2. Now then, we're ready for chapter 3. We started chapter 3 last week and got through the first few verses. And in chapter 3, it occurs 5 years after chapter 2 is finished. So Esther's been queen for about 5 years at this point in chapter 3, it appears. And why don't we start there? We'll just reread chapter 3 again and then pick up where we left off with chapter 3. Okay, so this is chapter 3, verse 1, please. And I have everything out of order up there, so that's why it's taking a minute to find stuff. They're doing a great job. Thank you, guys. Chapter 3, this is verse 1. It says, Haman plots against the Jews is what the chapter's about. Before I start reading this, let me preface this. At the end of chapter 2, what happens? While we're talking about Haman now, what happens at the end of chapter 2? Using as far as Mordecai is concerned. Mordecai, by the way, he raises Esther as his own child. He's actually her cousin. And so Mordecai and Esther are the two big figures of the whole book of Esther. What happens with Mordecai at the end of chapter 2? Anybody remember?
He learns of a plot to have the king assassinated, and then he goes to Esther and tells her about it, and Esther goes to the king and tells him about it, and then they record it in the books, the history books, and that's where it ends.
Right, thank you. Okay, so, yeah, chapter 2 ends with a plot being foiled where some of the king's own guards were trying to kill him, plotting to kill him. Mordecai, who is, as we said, the cousin to Esther, learns about this because he's sitting at the king's gate, and he tells other authorities, and they examine the proof and decide he's correct, and they execute the men who are going to try to kill the king. So Mordecai becomes a hero, basically, of sorts. They write this down, they chronicle it in the king's notes. He has record of it. And the king plans to do something for them, but 5 years have passed now, and nothing has been done for Mordecai. And so chapter 3 picks up 5 years later, and that's where we are at this point. And notice at the beginning of chapter 3 it says, Haman plots against the Jews. Now, we've not really been introduced to Haman yet, but Haman is going to be a very evil person. If this were a Disney movie, this is the guy that looks the part, that has that long black goatee and the big turban and everything on his head. That's the one, if this were a Disney movie. Okay, so that's where we are right now. So this starts out talking about Haman at this point. Okay, this is verse 1, chapter 3. After these things, King Ahasuerus, there we go, the accent's on the second syllable. Ahasuerus promoted Haman the Agagite. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I work on this at home, and then I get up here, and it's just out the window. Agagite, the son of Hammedath. I'll just Medadah. And if you can do better, please raise your hand, and I'll let you do this. Otherwise, just sit there and snicker with me, okay? So he's the son of the Ham guy. And advanced him and set him on the throne above all officials who were with him. So what this is telling us in verse 1, that made him second in command only under the king. Okay, we lost that because I was struggling so much with words. Okay, verse 2. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman. For the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai, who did not bow down or pay homage, he did not bow down. Okay, verse 3, please. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, why do you transgress against the king's command? Verse 4. And when they spoke to him day after day, so this happens more than once, when they spoke to him day after day, he would not listen to them. And they told Haman, in order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for they had told him he had told them that he was a Jew. Verse 5. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Mordecai was filled with fury. And verse 6. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, so that they made him known to him, the people of Mordecai. Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. Verse 7. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, the 12th month of King Ahasuerus, they cast that is, they cast lots, or rolled dice, you might say, before Haman day after day, and cast it month after month until the 12th month, which was the month of Adar. Verse 8, when Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there's a certain person scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of the kingdom. Their laws are different than those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so they did not not do the king's prophets. So that is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. Sorry about that. Verse 9. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver in the hands of those who have charge over the king's business. They may put it into the king's treasuries. Verse 10. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha. There we go, Hammedatha. The enemy of the Jews, verse 11. And the king said to Haman, the money is given to you, the people also to do with them as it seems good to you. Verse 12. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and the edict, according to all Haman commanded, and written in the king's satraps to the governors all over the provinces, to the officials of all the peoples, and every province in its own script and every person in its own language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. Verse 13. Letters were sent to all the couriers, by couriers to all the king's provinces with instruction to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which was the day of Adar, to plunder their goods. Verse 14. A copy of the document was issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the peoples to be ready for that day. Verse 15. The couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. The king and Haman sat down to drink. But the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. Okay. And that's the end of that chapter right there. So, remember how big I told you the kingdom was? They sent this decree everywhere throughout the kingdom. So if there's a Jew in any corner of that kingdom, on this one particular day, the 13th day of the 12th month, they could be killed. Not only could be killed, but they could, after you kill the person, you can take everything of his, and it could be your own items. So there's basically a bounty on their heads. You got whatever was theirs as a reward of that. So that's where we stand on this chapter. I think we've gotten down, as we're going through this and talking about some various things, let's see. We talked about, not very much. We kind of set everything up and then time ran out. Okay, so bounce back to verse 1 very quickly, please. We're not going to cover that verse 1 very much. The big thing we pointed out, I think last week, was the characteristics of these two people, the king and Haman. The king was very rich, but the king was also very much involved with having a good time. He enjoyed a good party. He enjoyed having his desires met. He enjoyed the very shallow things of life, it seems like. He didn't sanctify life. It was no problem for him to kill people just to prove that he could do it, or to try to squelch anything that might be going around him. He didn't have any characteristics for too many details, it seems like, except for things that immediately concerned him. As far as Haman, rich person, we know that. We don't know how he got his riches, but we know he's rich because he has all this money he's offering the king to let him do what he wants to do, we find out as we get into this. Haman also has a very high opinion of himself. We noticed in the first few verses right there that Haman was being honored by the king, that because of his promotion, everyone was to bow down to him. But early in the chapter, we see where Haman, for whatever reason, chooses not to bow down to him, and Haman doesn't even realize it at first. Someone has to bring it to his attention that this is happening. And after he realizes that this one person out of the whole group wasn't bowing down, he seeks out this person, finds out what's going on. Why is he not doing this? And he discovers that Haman's a Jew. And this further infuriates him. And so he is going to be plotting to get rid of Haman as the story continues. And I think that's where we got to last week. Now, why did Mordecai not bow down? We don't really know for sure, but what would be some reasons that he may not bow down to the king, or to Haman rather? What could be, if you're thinking about the story that we just have kind of rambled through just now, can you think of any reasons why he might not want to honor Haman?
Does it not have something to do with the fact that, I mean, they say he's a Jew, and you had all of them that were coming before that didn't have to bow down. Esther didn't do some of these things because of her lineage and her ability to choose, but had already demonstrated her vow.
Okay, I've caught part of that. Let me come back there to you and put that. Couldn't catch everything you said. Sorry. Okay.
Does it not have something to do with the fact that they even acknowledge when they're talking to him, and hey, he's a Jew, that's how come he's not doing some of this, because of all the things that like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and some of them had done, is that their religion was that they did not have anyone else to bow down to.
Okay. That's a very good possibility.
Which I think then, I mean, that translates into why he went after the whole of the lot versus just Mordecai.
Okay. That could be. That could be a very reason. And as I said before, we don't know exactly why. What was Mordecai's reasoning? But that's a very good possibility. We're going to talk about that. Yes. Yes, sir.
It was not uncommon for the Jews to bow in a sense of showing respect, like Moses to his father-in-law back to him, and some of that. But as far as bowing down to something that has set itself up as a deity, in Exodus you read that they shall not bow down to other gods, and that's what Haman was presenting himself to be.
Okay. Okay. So, not the matter of bowing per se, but because of the position that he put himself in.
The nature of why.
Why? Okay. Yeah, we're going to cover that too.
Good. Could it be that he just didn't like him?
Why do you not like him?
Because of his personality, and maybe he knew something. He knew what kind of man he was.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, he did. Maybe it could be just didn't like him. Could be because jealous. Because, chapter 2, we see Mordecai doing this great thing for the king, and what did he get out of it? He got nothing from it. And we see Haman doing nothing, and he got second in command. So it could be a sense of jealousy, possibly. And it could be a combination of these things, too. Because as I say, the Bible doesn't specifically tell us what it is. Anyone else? Okay, go ahead. Hang on a second.
Haman was an Amalekite, and they were the ones that opposed Israel when they first came out of Egypt, the very first people that opposed them.
Okay. There was a bad blood between those two tribes. That's correct. And that may be something else. That's another possibility. I think James even pointed out, made a statement last week about Samuel slicing up one of the ancestors. What was his name? Agag. Thank you. Agag. The Agagites. Am I saying that right? How do you say that? Everyone says. Okay. Yeah, the Agagites. So that long name is named after Agag, who got sliced up by Samuel. So yeah, the bad blood, and we know this culture hangs on to things for generations, and they wait quietly to their chance to settle scores. So that could be a possibility. Anything else? Anybody else? Okay. You have touched on most everything I was going to touch on. I do want to bring out one other item with this. And that's going back to what Cliff was talking about a second ago. As Cliff said, it's not unusual for people to show respect by bowing. The bowing is not a sin per se, but the fact that Haman seemed to put himself above, almost to the level of a deity, that could be a situation. And from what I understand, I don't know anything about Hebrew, don't know anything about Greek, but from what I understand or what I've read, apparently the word that's used for bow down in this instance is a little bit different than the word used in many other places in the Bible. That this word's showing a more sense of reverence. I don't know if it's if he lays prostrate in this process or what it is. Yes, Cliff.
If you remember the story of the three Hebrew children, the reason they were thrown in a fiery furnace was they wouldn't bow down.
Right.
And Daniel, when he went in the lion's den, basically was not told to bow down to anybody or anything except the king. And of course, we know the story there. Yeah. It's a matter of where they're putting these people. When we put something in the place where God ought to be, we cannot expect things to go good because of that.
Right. Okay. Good. I agree with you. Yeah. I don't have the verses that you mentioned right there. I do have a few other verses that I found, at least according to the references I was looking at, that states that the word that was translated bow down in this passage in Esther is the same word. If you will find, please, Psalm 22, verses 29 and 30. These are instances that use the same verb that was being used in Esther, in Haman's situation. It says, all the prosperous of the earth eat and worship before him, talking about the Lord, shall bow all who go down to the dust, even the one who could not keep himself alive. And then Psalm 95:6. O come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord, our Maker. Notice all these I'm reading are referring to God, right? Now, 2 Chronicles 2:29. 2 Chronicles 2:29. Is it not? Oh, I failed to put that one in there. Okay. So those are instances that, and 2 Chronicles 2:29 also has a similar passage, again, addressed to the Lord. So the word that's used for bow down in all other parts of the Bible is used in reference to putting yourself, submitting yourself to God. And this is the same word that's used here in Esther. And again, physically, I don't know if that is a difference. I don't know if it's all the way down prostrate, if that has anything to do with what you physically do, or if it's attitude. I don't know which it is that we're talking about there. Contrast that, though, please, with Esther 8:4. And I'm bringing this up because it's not a sin to show respect to those with authority. My goodness, I've rambled too much, don't I? Okay, let's see here. Can we find Esther 8:4, please? Did I put that in there? Okay, Esther 8:4 is dealing with Esther when she goes to approach the king. And at that time, later on, when she's standing there and wondering if he's going to take her life or not, says, when the king held out his golden scepter to Esther, Esther rose and stood before the king. So she rose. She was in a kneeling position at that point. So what I'm pointing out, it's a different word is used there. And the attitude that was apparently done was not a sinful attitude. It was not a sinful gesture in this case. So she raises herself up, and then she even falls to the feet of the king, which again, that's not, I think, is that verse 3? She does that? The verse before she falls before the king. So, yeah, verse 3, When Esther spoke again to the king, she fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman, the Agagite, and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. So, throwing yourself down in front of someone is not the issue. It's the attitude or of the person that's either on the floor or the person that's expecting it, the expectation of the person. Placing himself at a level equal, even with God in that respect is what we're looking at there. So I have about 5 minutes left here. Let's see here. Now, I mentioned before that all these people have gone back to Judah. Mordecai stayed. He didn't go back to Judah. He's here. By choice, he's here. We don't know anything about Mordecai at this point before he takes his stand. We don't know if he observed the laws of Moses or not, or if he had fallen into the ways of the people around him, their customs and religions. But we see him taking a stand at this point. Even as you know, he has told him, up to this point, he has told Esther not to let them know that she had a Jewish background, not make it hard on herself. We don't know exactly why he told her to do that. So, all that's in question. We just don't know. What does that say about us? Maybe in our closing thoughts here. We don't have time to talk about a whole lot, but how are we supposed to live? Are we supposed to fit in with the culture like Mordecai apparently was trying to do? Or are we supposed to live beyond the culture? When's it okay to fit in and when's it not okay to fit in with the culture? Do we just follow the traditions of the world 6 days a week, and on the first day of the week we follow God? We come here and go through the ritual of the singing and praying and the Lord's Supper, and then the rest of the week we get back into what takes place in America and all the politics and all the culture that's going around us.
Not to stir things up at the last second, but I think Esther is a very confusing book on that principle, because Mordecai will not bow down to Haman, but Mordecai gives his own cousin to the king and puts her in a situation that is not biblical. So that's confusing to me.
Yeah. Life is confusing, right? What we say last week? Life is hard, then you die, right? Life is hard, then you die. Okay, we'll try to get through chapter 3 next week then. Those of you going to be gone next week to Lads Leaders, I hope you have a great time. learn a lot, do a good job at what you prepared, and wish you all the best of luck with